Can spiritual beliefs be a valid part of informing political process? Stay tuned on Listen Up. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Duick. Today we enter the countdown for Canada's election. With a democracy that is a model to the world and an election race that's too close to call, voters head to the polls in the coming days. What role should faith play in this political process? What views do party leaders, lobbyists, and voters have about including God in the political process?
When you're a politician, it's a little more tricky because you have to serve all of your constituents, and Prime Minister has to serve all of Canada. But I think it really is important that the Prime Minister of Canada have a strong faith and have very strong values.
I think faith should play a role for each individual. I don't believe that you can create policy based on faith, but whether Mr. Harper is a man of faith or not, that's not why I support him.
I don't think faith enters into politics as much as people think it does or as much as they would like it to.
This election sees the first minority government Canada has had in 25 years fighting to get re-elected. And it's a political race dominated by debate over Canadian values and moral issues. Theft and ethics in a $300 million sponsorship scandal. The definition of marriage being changed and the power of the Supreme Court and Canada's seldom used notwithstanding clause. Caring for the country's children in a proposed national daycare plan, decriminalizing marijuana, and appeals for improved law and order. Dominant election themes of protecting and improving healthcare and increasing the amount of money in Canadian pockets by cutting back taxes. In light of moral realities and making choices on such important issues, today we ask a question that political advisors hope will never make its way to a policy platform. What role should faith play in developing public policy in a political party?
If you're a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good everything, then you should be able to play good politics too.
Politicians should do everything that is would be political correct, and religion should do everything that is religiously correct.
Although they are two separate things, you can't mix religion and politics, but you know what? Religion will play an important role down the road.
In a moment, we'll hear what the party leaders say on that difficult question, and we'll hear from some of Canada's best-known retiring politicians, Deb Gray, David Kilgour, Pat O'Brien, on how they handled that question. Hear now what is being said on the campaign trail.
This election is all about positive change for ordinary working people and their families. Positive change for the people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules. And the question in this election is really simple. Which party can deliver the change of government that we need to bring accountability to Ottawa and to your tax dollars and get on with addressing the real priorities of ordinary people and their families? And there's only one party that can do that, and that is the Conservative Party of Canada.
We will deliver the best plan for safer, healthier communities. And as the only truly national party, we will protect our unity with strong voices from Quebec. We will support Quebec families, we will support Canadian families, and we will defend our values.
On faith and politics, I've lost count of how many attempts we've made at Listen Up TV to try and get an interview with party leaders on this subject. But someone who has the scoop on this is our friends at Faith Today magazine. Publisher Bruce Clemenger joins us in Ottawa. And congratulations, Bruce, you got the scoop.
Well, thank you, Lorna.
Now let's go to what the party leaders said, and you gave them 600 words each. All the major leaders have responded. Paul Martin wrote, the relationship between faith and public policy in Canada should therefore be a synergetic partnership, working together to improve our social tapestry.
His comments are very much framed about Canada being a plural, diverse nation. He talked about the social tapestry, the multiculturalism, the religious diversity of Canada. and recognition then that faith does play an important role in the lives of many Canadians. And so therefore there is a synergistic partnership, his language, between faith and public policy.
For Stephen Harper, he wrote some more background, and you can see the policy man that he is coming out in here. And so he's explaining that phrase, separation of church and state, which people sometimes launch out not really understanding the history. And so he writes, the notion of separation of church and state refers to the state not interfering in religious practice and treating all faith communities impartially. It does not mean that faith has no place in public life or the public square. So I'm assuming, is this correct, that Mr. Harper is saying we can handle faith in politics?
Well, indeed, he actually goes further and says that it's perfectly legitimate for people to bring their faith perspectives to bear in public policy, in the public realm. Though he cautions, he says we also need to be open to perspectives of others. Again, we live in a plural society, and the issue of respect, the issue of religious freedom actually surfaced in all the parties' leaders' responses. But it is part of who we are. And either we allow people full expression of who they are and are able to engage in politics, in public life, authentically out of their faith traditions, or we try to closet them. And he's saying it's perfectly legitimate to allow people to engage in matters of public policy out of their faith perspective.
Jack Layton said, the challenge for Canadians who want to practice politics is how to do this appropriately in the secular, pluralistic, and multi-faith society that Canada has become. For Christians, this is particularly challenging because this needs to be done in a way that preserves the right of Christians to bring their values into the public square while respecting the fact that in a post-Christendom context, no policy can be officially adopted or rejected for explicitly Christian reasons. What was interesting to me here, Bruce, is this is the first leader who just clearly says this is a post-Christian country, so just be part of the mix, right?
He is, but he's also emphasizes very strongly the important prophetic role that churches and other religious institutions have to play in contemporary Canadian society. I think the undercurrent there is actually something that's reflected also in Harper's response. Harper talked about being open to the perspectives of others as we, say, as Christians, bring our faith perspectives to bear. Jack Layton and Bill Blakey, who co-authored the piece, they echo that and actually push further and say we need to be also respectful of others. As we bring our faith perspectives to bear in public life, we have to be mindful that others in our plural society will bring their perspectives to bear as well. And we need to do this in respect, out of respect for one another, and try to advance conversations. It also means that as we engage in public life, we need to articulate public reasons why we believe certain positions should be taken. So it's not good enough to say, well, the Bible says it or the Quran says it, but that in this kind of what they call a post-Christian environment, in this secular Canada, for laws to have force and effect, that we need to find, in a sense, public grounds upon which those laws can be framed. And he's basically encouraging Christians to engage in that process, but be mindful that that's the context in which we're engaging.
And Gilles Duceppe of the Bloc Québécois wrote, matters of faith and religion enter into the realm of private affairs, and that consequently decisions regarding them rest with the individual.
The response was actually from the correspondence coordinator for the Bloc and not from Mr. Duceppe. But again, the point, I would agree that faith is a personal matter. I also, however, believe that faith has public consequence. And that was really the question we were trying to tease out from the political leaders, and unfortunately the Bloc refused to respond.
Thank you very much, publisher Bruce Clemenger, for getting the answer at Faith Today that we were all curious about. And the full text of that is available through the listenuptv.com website. Make the link there and you can read what it is the leaders had to say about faith and politics. When we return, the three main issues facing Canadians in this election have emerged to be taxes, healthcare, and law and order. Faith lobbyists weigh in on what their particular perspective brings to those issues when we return.
We have a house of prayer now right in Ottawa where groups of intercessors come from across Canada, and they gather in this house of prayer where we bring them to meet with the politician, with an MP, and the protocol of that MP is to then invite them to come to the question period And in question period, they look up into the visitors gallery, and there they see people from their own riding praying for them. And we feel that's a very important thing to do.
Listen Up is back, asking if faith is part of the political process in our country. And 3 panelists who say yes, it is, and here's why, are representing today from the United Church of Canada, where you have more than 4 million Canadian voters. Susan Eagle, City Councillor in London and Public Policy Advisor for the National Church Office, the United Church. From Ottawa, Joseph Ben-Ami, President of Canadian Values and a representative of the Jewish community, and Faytine Crisco, an evangelical activist and founder of For My Canada, a faith-based initiative getting young people to vote. And I would mention also best wishes to our Muslim faith lobbyists, because at the time of this taping, they are celebrating the festival of Eid, and we're sorry they could not join us. But thank you all for being here, and I want to ask what faith brings to the key issues that have emerged in our current election. And Faytine, let's start with you on law and order. It's a huge issue affecting young people. How could your faith view inform public policy on law and order?
When we think about things like law and order, I believe that if we're really looking at a mitigatory approach and we really want to see these statistics plummet, let's start talking about some of the core issues of family, which of course are so central to the heart of God. Let's start talking about seeing programs implemented that will value the family, that will build up the family, that will begin to impart things into young people right in the early years of life.
Susan, let's talk about from the United Church of Canada. What would your faith view bring into the law and order platform that has arisen in this election?
Well, I think, first of all, the United Church is certainly not soft on crime. We're concerned about crime, and there's a rising statistic that we're very concerned about. But I think for us as Christians, we have to look at the concept of restorative justice. Mandatory sentencing alone is not going to stop crime from happening. We have to look at issues of prevention. What is it that's the cause in the first place?
Would you support this, that there's going to be a change in the parole if the Conservatives, the finishing out of the mandatory sentencing?
Well, if that's all they do, it's going to be a feel-good response, but it's not going to change the statistics at all. And the studies do not show that simply increasing jail time and mandatory sentencing alone will make a difference.
A faith activist trying to put an issue of Canadian values into the election debate. Where do those views fit on the debate over health care, Joseph?
I think it's most important to remember that faith really is about shaping the character of the people who are developing public policy. And of course, healthcare is one of those critical areas. I think that where our faith would really interact with healthcare policy development is we're concerned that some of the moral questions surrounding healthcare are not being asked. We seem to be in a bit of a rut, if you will, in this country, where we're not thinking outside of the box. We're not prepared to take bold initiatives, even, by the way, if that means some sort of allowance of privatization at some level.
Okay, what would be a question that could get asked coming from your faith view about health care that's not yet been tabled?
Right. Well, of course, when I was talking about the moral issue, the number one moral question is it morally acceptable for us as Canadians to accept delayed treatment and people dying on waiting lists, waiting for treatment, while we continue to find ways to defend a status quo that's clearly not working?
I don't know if there's any way, faith groups can agree on the tax issue, but it's been a very hot debate throughout this. Susan, let's address what does a faith view bring to tax discussions?
Well, we're certainly not the first ones to coin the phrase, but the concept that taxes are the price we pay to be a civilized society is really very, very fundamental to us.
So tax cuts worry you as a United Church?
Tax cuts worry me if what happens is we cut social services, if we find other ways of requiring people to pay.
Including leaning on the churches.
Well, it's not just leaning on the churches. I mean, I'm also a municipal councillor, and I know that when federal and provincial programs are cut, they get downloaded to municipalities, and then it becomes a property tax base as opposed to an income tax base.
All right, let's go to Ottawa again. Fétine and Joseph. Taxes and a faith view. Fétine, let's start with you.
I think what we need to look at is the margin of error sort of in that and say, okay, is the money, where is the line where the money that's coming from the people is also going to serve the people, which I believe in a democracy is what is supposed to obviously happen. And so let's start looking at this margin of error, of this waste. And I know as a young Canadian myself, I have no problem paying into a tax system that will actually come back as a benefit either to myself directly or to those who are in need. And so my question is really about that margin of error, the margin of waste, and how can we be more productive and more effective with the hard-earned money that Canadians are giving into the tax system.
The number one expense that the average family has in Canada are taxes. And if we want families to continue to grow, then we have to find ways to put more money in the pockets of parents.
Thank you very much. When we return, recently retired politicians who spent a career in Ottawa combining their faith and their political job give us some advice.
Stand on your faith. Don't be intimidated into silence. There is an attempt by the liberal media in this country, there's an attempt by so many people themselves in politics to say, you can't reference your religious faith. There is a separation of church and state in this country. You can't talk about your religious beliefs in the House of Commons. That's nonsense. That's undemocratic. We have in this country freedom of religion. And I, as a Christian, Catholic, or any other person coming from a faith perspective, whatever that faith is, has every right to say, look, here's what my morals tell me, and I openly profess them, and I'll stand on them, and I won't hang them up like a coat as I enter the House of Commons.
Well, now we're back on the subject of faith and politics, and how do politicians let their personal faith influence their job? Joining us now are two citizens that spent most of their career serving Canada in public office. Deborah Gray. Deb, great to have you always. Your history-making career took a political turn in 1989 when she became the Reform Party's first Member of Parliament. Her biography title sums it up: never retreat, never explain, never apologize. My life, my politics. Deborah, you're a media commentator, so thank you for coming here now.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, Lorna.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. And in Ottawa, leaving the House of Commons after 26 years, David Kilgour, Member of Parliament known as a crusader for third world issues, Defender of the West, Chair of the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast, and All-Party Multi-Faith Committee on Religious Cultural Harmony. He is the second longest serving Member of Parliament in the House, and he's on record that the low point in that long term came last year over religious beliefs being attacked on same-sex marriage debate. David, let's start with you. Your advice, you're dusting off, a long career, for combining faith and politics.
Well, I think you do it every day. Basically, you have to, if you have a faith, and many MPs do, to a greater or lesser degree, you have to try to apply your religion, your philosophy, on a daily basis, almost every person you meet and every bill you vote on and everything you do.
All right, and Deborah, come on, you prayed constantly about your job. First Reform MP, you had so much new ground. Was it like David, constantly?
Yeah, it was terrifying, but exhilarating at the same time. And I remember spending a lot of time in the chambers as the only Reform MP there, just thinking what a great opportunity this is to be able to pray for so many of the people that are serving in the country. And so I was never ashamed of that. I didn't get up and scream hallelujah and carry on in the chambers, but to be able to sit there quietly and just commit all that stuff to God. And that, to me, is what living your faith is all about. As David has said, it affects everything you do in terms of legislation, etc. But it's also living it, not just prattling away about it.
But neither of you, David or Deborah, are quiet. I can't think of two MPs who were more, I was going to call you a troublemaker, Deborah. And David, you really resigned over policy issues where your faith came into conflict. Is that what happened?
Oh, it was a large number of issues, Lorna. It was certainly same-sex marriage was an issue, but it was the question of what was happening in Darfur was probably at the time even more important, and continues to happen in Darfur, by the way. And in fact, I'm off to Ethiopia tonight. I'm leaving for Morocco and Ethiopia, and with a faith-based group called First Step that's doing good reconciliation work in the Western Sahara Desert between, as you know, there's been a terrible conflict there, and we're trying to bring the parties together of different faiths, bring them together, reconciliation.
But your government's inability to act on Sudan, you were looking for just 500 troops, just a sign that Canada was going to engage the awful genocide that was going on there. You eventually felt you couldn't continue to serve under that kind of faith conflict. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the, if you like, the straw that or one of the larger straws that broke my liberal camel's back, as I put it.
All right. And Deborah, did you have times where you felt, I cannot line up my Christian conscience with what's going on here?
Oh, there are lots of difficult days on that, that's for sure. Whether it's a lobbyist in trying to convince you one way or the other on a particular bill, whether it's people in the constituency, because you're representing 100,000 plus. So that makes it tough too. But I think the biggest thing, Lorna, is that when we talk about what a pluralistic, tolerant society Canada is, I remember going down there first and thought, oh, well, okay, they may disagree with me, but I am a Christian. That is my faith base, my deeply held religious views. I'm a Christian, so although you may not agree with it, you certainly would accept it. That instant, a wall came up, and I was marked. And I thought, if we are going to talk about tolerance, then we need to talk about tolerance for every single person of faith. And I have really noticed that over the years, that it's okay to be anything else, but as soon as you stand up and say, well, I'm a Christian, and I'm not going to scream and yell about it, but I am living that faith, then there is a real wall between. And that's really unfortunate because it makes it a double standard.
Well, and this is the year where we have seen more faith-based activism on this election campaign, and I would like to ask both of you for your advice, given that you feel. Let's David, maybe start with you in Ottawa. Your advice for voters and for activists who want to see faith part of the political process.
Well, there's a book that was written, Lorna, you've probably read it several years ago, called The Political Meaning of Christianity. And there have been other books. Jim Wallace, for example, has written books about faith from perhaps a different perspective from Christianity. And I don't think anybody, certainly not Debbie or I, would say that God or Jesus is on one side or another. I think he is well above all of these partisan shenanigans that we have on fighting during an election campaign. And anybody who gets up and says that God requires me to vote for X or Y, I think is demeaning both God and and themselves by saying that sort of thing. I don't think anybody would ever say that one's faith requires them to vote in a particular way. There are Christians, for example, or Muslims or Sikhs in all parties. And I hope we never get to the point where some countries, such as, for example, France has got to, where we're into that kind of a terrible situation. I'm happy that there are, for example, Christians and Muslims and Jews in all parties. And I'm glad that we don't have a situation like some countries do where faith people vote only for one party and people without faith or hostility to faith vote for another party. That, to me, when you get to that point, you're in a terrible situation.
Okay,
yeah, I agree with you on that, David, but at the same time, you can't shut one out because it's not politically correct.
Oh,
I think that's where Parliament sadly has got to. Now as a member of a faith community, I sort of felt assured on this whole same-sex debate that the Prime Minister and the government was going to make sure that religious communities were protected in that they wouldn't have to. And all of a sudden, in the leaders' debate, bing, out of nowhere,
surprise.
Comes Paul Martin saying, well, we want to get rid of the notwithstanding clause. Wait a minute, that was sacred a while ago, and it wasn't put into the Constitution lightly. And now it's like a bargaining chip to say, okay, please vote for me. I'll toss that out if you want me to.
Well, as a matter of fact, Debbie, as you I'm sure know, somebody pointed out last night that it wasn't so many months ago that Mr. Martin was saying that, in fact, he would use the notwithstanding clause to protect the rights of priests and members of clergy not to perform marriages if somehow the court said they had to do that.
All right, it was one of those moments where, whether he liked it or not, faith entered the political race. Debbie, I want to close with you asking, are you telling us your advice for voters? I mean, you come from activist Alberta, where most of the faith-based activism started and has spread east. Your advice for faith-based voters and the way they lobby?
Well, I think it's important not just to talk about your faith, but live it. And so don't tell me, show me. And I think then that they'll get candidates in place that are really good, sound folks who are going to live their faith in Parliament, regardless what it is.
Closed captioning provided by Duca Financial Services Credit Union. Discover more affordable banking at duca.com.
Well, they could call this a bestseller, but it's free. It's Our Daily Bread, one of North America's most popular spiritual resources for the questions that affect your lives. Available for you at keypromises.org, no cost or obligation. Order your copy today. At listenuptv.com, we have a useful link which you can use to write to any political candidate in Canada. It gives you the scoop on everyone running in your riding. Check it out at listenuptv.com. And there's a link there from Charity Village that gets you right into a direct email at any political candidate's office. So write to them. You know, here's what happens when I write to my favorite candidate and say, bravo for taking on one of the toughest jobs in the country. Because when I stop and think about what they are trying to do, I remember the clear political advice the Bible gives about elections. It says, pray for your leaders so it will go well for all of us. Not bad advice for mixing faith and politics. That's this week's Spiritual Look at the News. I'm Lorna Dueck. Thanks for watching.